Well, good evening, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Glad you can join us all. Tonight we have Steve Stockton with us, and we're going to be talking about fays and fairies and dig into some stories and some history and everything that we can think of about fays. And hope you all enjoy it. And be sure to subscribe and support and like Steve's channels, ATM Among the Missing and 13 Past Midnight, all on YouTube and other social media. And I hope you guys all enjoyed the show, and we'll bring Steve up.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Steve.
Good to see you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for being here. So do you want to start off by talking about your other channels real quick?
Sure. I've got right now my big channel is Among the Missing. That's my new missing persons channel. I'm not associated with that other channel anymore, but I'm doing my own thing now, have autonomy, and I love that. I'm doing it the right way and the way I want to do it. Getting close to 60,000 subscribers over there in like 6 weeks.
Wow.
So it's really blowing up, and I appreciate all the support. 13 Past Midnight, that's my paranormal channel. I've had that for several years. It's getting close to 13,000. And then also have an Insomniac Radio Theater that I'm doing with Midnight Society, my future Mrs. Stockton there, as soon as we set a date. And that has like the best of LibriVox audio recordings and BBC Radio 4 fare from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I've got Saucer Cult and what else? There's 5 of them right now. True Crime Breakdown, that one doesn't have any content yet. We just finished the first video and actually premiered it on the other channels, and it'll be moving over there. But try to stay busy.
You are
Sounds
very
like
busy.
it.
I don't know how you do it all.
I don't sleep.
I
Not
bet
much
not.
anyway. And got a lot of good help. Like I said, Midnight Society is my partner in a lot of these things. And then Sandy, she's been my writer for a long time. And I love the way she writes. She's the favorite writer that I've ever had. And pretty much anything you see on Among the Missing, Sandy wrote it. So
Very nice.
and then I'm writing books all over the place. I've got 5 already that have all been Amazon bestsellers. Thanks everybody. Strange Things in the Woods, My Strange World, which is my own personal paranormal encounters, and then got National Park Mysteries and Disappearances series, volume 1, 2, and 3. And I'm working on about 5 more books as we speak.
Oh my,
Wow.
that's amazing. So let's go ahead and dive into the fays and fairies. I mean, I know some about it. I mean, I've read up, and obviously growing up in my childhood, you always saw Tinker Bell on Disney and all that stuff, all the kidsy fairy tales and the fairies. But obviously when you get into fays, there's a little bit more of a darker side, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the problem with a lot of it. Everybody's been Disneyfied, and they think of fairy, they think of Tinkerbell, some little gossamer winged thing that's all cute and flits around. But it's not that way at all. And I've found that people that, especially the missing cases, people that believe in the UFO theory or the dogman theory or the Bigfoot theory, when it comes to that, they will giggle at you if you mention the Fae. And that's just wrong, because we've been, programmed to think that way. But if you look at it in the bigger picture, back out to about 10,000 feet and look down on it, Bigfoot, UFOs, dogman, all that falls under the umbrella of the Fae. If you dig into it, particularly like in some of the Celtic countries where the Fae was almost like a religion and probably still is, they have all those creatures and the entities and things, and have for hundreds of years. I read one account recently, I think it was from the early 1800s, where some men in Ireland encountered a horseless buggy that came down out of the sky that had little men in it. Well, that's a UFO encounter. There's been stories of the hairy giants that are among the Fae hierarchy that come out of the woods and tear up things, or that's your Bigfoot encounter. It's all part of the Fae. It's all connected. There are no coincidences. It's synchronicities. But like I said, people don't see it that way. But if you look at the hierarchy of the Fae, there's so many different kinds of them. There's goblins and pixies and elementals are part of the Fae. I've had what I believe to be Fae encounters, but I didn't know it until much later in life. But I think it's out there. That's even in the Smokies and the Native American lore. You have stories of the little people, the Fae, and the fairy lights in the mountains, and things like the brown mountain lights. Those have all been attributed to the Fae.
Right. I was just getting ready to say there's so many different types and so many kinds, depending on where you read about them, they include more and more all the time, all the way to elves and leprechauns. And
Yeah.
I mean, when I think of a leprechaun and an elf, I don't think of a fairy or a fae.
Mm-hmm. But that's all part of it. Like this whole elf on the shelf thing that people do around Christmas time, that actually invites them into your home, and that you don't want to do that because there's only like one or two out of all those varieties that are even pleasant toward humans. They all hate humans. They're masters of trickery and disguise. And anytime you have any kind of dealings with the Fae, you're going to lose because they stack the odds in their favor. You have to watch the way you say things, the way you word things. And again, just like that elf on the shelf and things, you can invite stuff in. I was on with Amber's Paranormal World a while back, and she's like, just show of hands in the chat, how many people have a welcome mat? Of course, just about everybody does. She said, that's just inviting stuff into your home. And somebody said, well, what if I flip it upside down? And she said, no, that anything underground will see it and come up. Either don't have one or get one that says go away, or mine says ghoulish greetings. So I'm not in any better shape myself. I left my one up from Halloween. But knock on wood, how many times have you ever done things and knocked on wood?
Right.
Right.
When you do that, you're calling a Fae spirit. You're calling a wood nymph or some sort of elemental to come and do something. If you look at a lot of these missing person cases, there's a huge majority of them, especially in these clusters, that go disappearing near berry patches and water. And those berry patches, those belong to the Fae. Not only is it one of their food sources, but it's also they get in those patches and the briars there. That's where they have their mating and their reveries and stuff. So you're kind of keeping them from getting their groove on if you're in there picking berries. They don't like the color red. An inordinate amount of people have gone missing wearing red. You think that'd be just the opposite? Anybody wearing red would be easy to spot. But Dennis Martin disappeared from the Great Smoky Mountains Father's Day, 1969. He was wearing a red jacket. There was a story I covered not too long ago of a girl in, I think it was either, I believe it was the Bennington Triangle, one of those up there, had on a bright red jacket. College girl just went around the corner. They never saw her again. And iron, the fairies don't like iron. I've got an iron bracelet that I wear when I go out in the woods. You can find them on Etsy. That's another reason that people hang a horseshoe. Part of that luck is that metal up there to keep the fairies away. And there's things that, you hear changelings and things like that. I covered the Riker Webb case recently. And if you look at the picture of that little boy before he got lost in the woods and when he came back out, it doesn't even look like the same kid. He saw something. He encountered something out there. And somebody even commented, that's not the same kid. That's a changeling. Take that thing and put it back in the woods and go look for the real kid. Because that's more part of the Fae legends and things, that they take children and they will replace it with a not so good of a copy, that they need that human blood to carry on their race. And that's one of the reasons that they hate humans so much, because we've got something that they don't have. I don't know if it's a soul or compassion or empathy or what, but some people claim that the Fae are fallen angels. Or there's another story about Lilith, who, according to some sources, was Adam's first wife, and the kids they had together, she didn't bathe them and hid them underground to keep God from yelling at her about it, and he made it so those children perpetually stay underground as a punishment for her. And some people say that's where the Fae come from. So it's one of those things, the more you delve into it, the deeper and deeper you get in.
Right.
No,
And
it reminds me of Rumpelstiltskin a little bit about how you had to know his name because a lot of times fays and fairies don't want you to know their name, and if you say it, then there's consequences to that. And you said something about taking, the babies or the people and hide them underground, and Rumpelstiltskin, didn't he take one of the children in place?
I think so. And a lot of those the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, they were based in things that actually happened. I mean, they're fantastical, and again, they've kind of been Disneyfied. But if you go and read the original, especially in the German from the Brothers Grimm, those stories are awful. They're not anything that you would read a kid. I mean, there's murders and kidnappings and torture and all kinds of stuff. Everything's been sanitized and dumbed down, and I think we've lost a lot of our legends and our myths and things in there that have some basis in reality. I mean, a lot of those are cautionary tales and not just made up to scare kids.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of written books about fays and fairies if you go way back. I was looking them up today even on a lot of that. And that's where they was talking about why they were afraid of iron because we had iron swords and they had like copper, I believe, at the time.
Mhm.
So obviously the iron won, so that's why they didn't like it.
And down south, where I'm from, and in the Celtic countries too, people will put iron in the bed with a baby in its crib. Or maybe there's even been cribs that were made out of iron, and that's supposed to keep the fae from snatching your kid. They would also, in Appalachia, where I'm from, they would pin babies to their blanket, pin their clothing to the pillow or the blanket or whatever they were laying on, they're ticking, so that nothing could take them out of there without at least some trouble.
Wow.
And if your safety pin was made out of iron, all the better.
Now, where did history come from for making fairy gardens and inviting them into your yard? I mean, that seems like a counterproductive thing that you really probably don't really want to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's just a deception. I mean, the Fae folk are the kings and queens of deception. They will trick you in any way they can, and like the elf on a shelf and things like that. It's I've got a video on 13 Past Midnight of a troll bridge that somebody started where I used to live in Oregon. Is those little troll dolls. Remember the ones from the 60s that had the shock
Right.
hair and stuff? Somebody just took one of those and put it up on this old disused railroad trestle. And then more and more and more of them started showing up. And now it's covered with them.
Oh, wow.
From all people climbed way up in there to place them there. Well, I heard a story of one lady that took one of those. She liked it, thought it was cute. She just took it off the bridge and took it home. She lived by herself, didn't have any pets or anything. And just shortly after that, she heard like giggling and little footsteps and stuff. And she would find that troll doll in different places. And she eventually took it back and put it on the bridge where it belonged and didn't have any more trouble. So they can inhabit things like that. I mean, if you follow the Annabelle the doll or Robert the doll in Key West, doll, it was a type of puppet or a poppet, which is an early forerunner to a voodoo doll from the European countries.
Yeah,
So
they have what is it? Annabelle's in a museum, and you're supposed to leave. You're not supposed to take any of the notes or stuff from the case or whatever, otherwise it'll follow you home.
And Robert the doll is the same way. He's behind glass in Key West, and the people that work in I think the Artist's House, I think is the name of the museum there. They've seen it move. They've just shifted around. Sometimes it'll be looking a different way. You have to ask the doll before you take its picture. And the walls in that room where he's at are lined with photos, Polaroids and old stuff even, where people didn't ask permission, and they had all kinds of weird supernatural and sometimes tragic events happen. So they mailed the picture back and said, I didn't ask, so please give this back to Robert.
Wow.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I've heard stories about these dolls moving.
Yeah, and it's kind of like that Chucky movie, where the serial killer put his soul in the doll before he passed away. There's certain rituals and things apparently where you can cause things to go into inanimate objects like that and they become animated. I don't know if it's more like a tulpa or some sort of black magic or something, but I've seen some haunted dolls before. When I lived in Portland, Oregon, I lived in Selwood neighborhood, which is an old Victorian neighborhood. And to get to this little grocery store that I liked to, I had to walk about a block past some antique shops and coffee shops. one night I'm walking down the sidewalk, and I've been in this antique shop before, and they had some hideous looking antique dolls in the window. These, the bakelite heads with stuff flaking off of them, and cracked porcelain and stuff. And I'm coming down the sidewalk and just passing in front of this antique store, and it was closed, locked up for the night, and had like the metal shutters. There was no way anybody could have been in there. And I noticed these dolls in the window, and this one looked particularly creepy, and it was kind of looking up the sidewalk at me, and I just kind of moved a little bit over closer to the road and continued on. Went up to the store, got what I wanted, was walking by the same antique store. This time it's on my left since I'm going the other direction. And that doll that creeped me out on the way down, it's now looking at the direction I'm coming from. Now its head had turned enough that it was, and I even stopped and looked at it. I thought, and I backed up and walked by it again to think maybe it was an illusion the first time I went by, but it was looking away from me then. So again, I don't want anything to do with dolls. And again, that's probably one of the Fae thing, some sort of entity, poltergeist, or a demon, or whatever you want to call it, can get in those dolls.
Now, is there good and bad fairies and fays, or is there a separation between the fae and the fairies, like one being good, one being evil, or are they all?
There's only one type that's even somewhat beneficial to humans, and I believe it's a pixie. I'm not sure. I can't. There's so many different kinds of them. On 13 Past Midnight, we had a video around Christmas time called A Christmas Warning. Susan Woodcarver wrote a great script about a creature called the Tomte, which is like a Norwegian elf or goblin or fae, whatever you want to call it. And you have to leave it out certain things to eat, or it will do things like cause your cow to dry up, if not outright kill it, or can do something small like hide your car keys, hide your remote, but they don't like to be toyed with.
Yeah, my family heritage, part of it's French, but my mom's side's 100% Swedish, so they have the Tompkins and the Swedish Santa Clauses and
there are places in some Scandinavian countries where they will build a highway around an outcropping of rock rather than blow it up and risk angering the trolls or whatever they believe lives in there. And that's verifiable. They really do that.
Wow.
Yeah, the fairy circles, they don't disturb those either. That's really religious to them over there too.
Yeah, I would see those as a kid, and my grandmother would say, "Don't, whatever you do, don't go in there." A lot of times down south, I would see them in mushrooms, and it'd be almost a perfect circle.
I was going to ask you that. I heard that you're not supposed to go inside those.
Yeah, not supposed to step in it. That's very disrespectful, and they don't like that. And God help you if you were to fall asleep inside one, if you found one that big. I've never seen them over just, a couple of feet, but apparently there are bigger ones, but I wouldn't go to sleep in one. That's kind of like in North Carolina. There's a place called the Devil's Tramping Ground, which is out in the woods. It's just this big circular, almost completely circular dead spot. There's nothing grows there. No weeds, no grass, no trees, nothing. And scientists from, can't remember which university in North Carolina, studied that soil, and they found it to be absolutely sterile. There's nothing in it.
Wow.
And the legend is that the devil came down and walked in a circle there while he was thinking up ways to vex mankind, and that killed everything. But last time I was there was a lot of trash and things like that in it, beer cans and stuff. But there were stories of a Boy Scout troop that decided they were brave, and 3 or 4 of them were going to camp out in it. And all kinds of things happened to them. A couple of them went mad. Another kid's hair turned white. I think another one died unexpectedly or in a strange manner. So a lot of that stuff you don't want to fool with, especially if you think it might be connected to the Fae or some kind of curse or something evil in that regard.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, whether the circle, the mushroom circles or the fairy circles would be like a portal or some kind of other dimension when you go into it, or how do people end up being missing?
That's a possibility. I mean, again, we go back to the fairy tales here. Rip Van Winkle, he was in the mountains. He saw these little men playing tin pins or bowling, doing like lawn bowling. And he took some of their liquor that they offered him that they had in a jug there. and he fell asleep. And then the next thing he remembers, he wakes up. He's got a beard longer than yours because he's been asleep for 25 years. Goes back into town, and like people, nobody knows him, recognizes him, remembers him. And there's stories like that of things happening in the Smokies. And one of the strangest things that ever happened to me up there, I'd been up to Cleveland's Dome, which is the highest point in the Smokies. There's a lookout up there, and on a clear day, you can see way out. But the Smoky Mountains, they call that for a reason. And the day I was up there, the smoky fog, or whatever you want to call it, off the mountains had rolled in. It was in the afternoon. And I'm not one to take trails and stuff, or I wasn't back then. I was just kind of bushwhacking, and the trails are for tourists, and that's a very crowded and popular trail. So I was just going through the woods, and I was coming back down off of Cleveland's Dome, and I saw a clearing, and in this clearing there was this tree, and it was the type that doesn't even grow on that part of the mountain. I believe it was probably an oak or maybe even a beech tree. And the only thing you have up at that elevation, there's some red oaks, but they don't look like this. But this was like a Disney tree. I mean, like it was Imagineered. It was so big and so real that it didn't even look real. It would take 5 or 6 people holding hands to get all the way around it. And it was in this little clearing, and the shafts of sunlight were breaking through the clouds, and it looked like something out of a Frank Capra movie or something. Here's this amazing supernatural looking tree, the lights shining down on it, and I walked over to this clearing, and I'm marveling at this tree. And I've had this happen in the woods other places before too. Everything went silent. I mean, it was like somebody hit the mute button. You couldn't hear the wind, you couldn't hear the leaves, you couldn't hear the water off in the distance, or travel, or cars or people traveling. And that's always a hint and a half to get out of there when you hear that. But this particular time, I'm so marveling at this tree, and it had gone so quiet. I mean, just like it being in a vacuum, you can't hear anything. And I'm looking at that, and the sun's shining, and I remember thinking, that'd be a good place to just sit down and relax. I've been hiking and bushwhacking. I could sit down here by this tree and just lean up against it and enjoy nature. And then that continued on, like, that might even be a good place to take a nap. I bet I could lay down here and just snooze for a little while, and then I'd get up all refreshed and ready to go. And then all of a sudden, it's like something snapped in my head. I'm like, where'd that thought even come from? It's going to be dark soon. I need to get down off this mountain and get back to the trailhead where I'd parked. But it was like something in the woods was luring me into this false sense of security. Oh, you're tired. Look how peaceful this is. Sit down, take a rest, take a nap. And I honestly think that if I had listened to whatever that evil voice was, even though it didn't sound evil, it was just as sweet as could be, I would have been one of those people that went missing in the Smokies. They would have never seen me again, or I'd be Rip Van Winkle, and I still wouldn't be out of there. But I've gone back and looked for it, but this was in a time when I didn't have a GPS or anything like that. I don't leave home without one. Now this is an old one from the 90s, but personal locator beacons are good too. But I didn't have a GPS. I used to just use a compass. I had an orienteering compass and a topo map. And if you learn how to do that, you can get anywhere in the woods, even at nighttime if you've got a flashlight or a headlamp, or you can chart by stars. But I've tried to go back and find that place on many occasions. It doesn't exist. And I think, well, this rock looks right, and that tree, but there's no clearing. There's no big tree. But again, if you get to wandering around, especially someplace like the Smokies, where there's thousands of acres, everything starts looking alike. That's one way people get lost. You panic. You can't tell one tree from another. One rock looks the same. And a lot of times you're walking in a circle and don't even know it. There's something about our, whatever you want to call it, our innate abilities or whatever, that when we're lost, we tend to walk in a circle. And that's why they tell you, if you are lost, just stay still and don't walk, because you'll just wear yourself out going in circles. But I've been like that before. I've been like, didn't I pass that rock already? And then realize I'm going in a big circle. Now there's line of sight stuff that you can do where you pick something straight ahead of you and you walk that way, and every few feet you turn and look back and make sure you're traveling in a straight line. But that's hard to do if it's heavily wooded or heavily forested. But wherever that tree is, I never could find it again. And
That story reminds me of the ancient mariners when they hear sirens whispering out in the winds their name. It's all pleasant, and then pretty soon they're crashing up on the rocks.
yeah, those are a type of the Fae. The sirens, the banshees that they have in Ireland and Scotland, and a lot of those banshees, they're assigned to a certain family. That when members of that family are about to die, that's when they'll hear the banshees wail, and that's frightening when you think about it. But the only other tree I've ever seen that even came close to that one is down at Fort Loudon, Tennessee, Fort Loudon Dam down there. They've got a recreation of the original Fort Loudon, and then right there on the same property, there's a Sequoia Museum. He's the one that developed the Cherokee alphabet. And out in the edge of the parking lot there's an Indian mound with remains and stuff in there, and it's got a big plaque on it. Well, if you go around behind that in the woods, just a little ways, a few yards, there's a tree like that doesn't even look real. The ground under it's bare, and that's somebody's power spot. When you go there, you feel like you're not supposed to be there. And I've got Cherokee blood on my dad's side, but I didn't. I felt like I was intruding somewhere where I wasn't supposed to be. And now that one is there all the time. I've been there several times, and every time I'm there, I go back and look at it. But the tree, excuse me, that I saw up on Cleveland's Dome, it was a lot like that tree that's down there by the Sequoia Museum.
It makes me think that, we talk about the supernatural powers or whatever the fairies and fays have, and people talk all the time about trees being involved, whether the portals or the elementals can use them to go in and out and hide. And I wonder how many 411 missing people are around the trees or get lured to a tree.
Yeah, well, that's you go in the woods, there's trees, and there are wood spirits and things. Susan Woodcarver, that she does carvings. She made this for me, and
Beautiful.
she let the wood tell her what it looked like. That's the way she carves. She takes this piece of wood and it speaks to her and said, "This is what I look like." And she said,
Wow.
I just carve away everything that doesn't look like that. And no two are alike. And she's put crystals and things on here, moss. And then on the back, she's got a rune of protection for me there.
Wow.
And Susan, I can't remember the name of her website. It's on here. You can find her on Facebook. Susan Alexander Carves, I think, is the name of it. But
it looks real.
wood has spirits in it. It's a living
Mhm.
creature. It's a living thing, and I believe everything that's living is connected. You can call it string theory, or when you get into some of that stuff. But I believe all living things, plants, animals, humans, we're all connected. And there's other woods like that. I've had guitars before that I picked up that just sounded magic. I'll never forget one time I was in a music store, early 80s. I was in college, and I was looking in the used section. I picked up a really nice looking Gibson Les Paul off the wall, and it was out of my price range. I think it's about $700 even back then. And I started strumming it, and it was like the notes just would break up into a symphony of other little notes. I was doing chords and things that I didn't even know I could do. And my friend kind of looked at me shocked, and he said, "How come you don't always play like that?" And I didn't know I could. But there was something about that guitar. It was either the wood that it was made from, or the luthier whose hands carved it, or a combination of the two. And I've had other guitars like that. I've got a Martin Johnny Cash signature model over here it's got some mojo to it. But then I've had other guitars, maybe even high-end expensive ones, and it doesn't feel like some of them feel. There's a magic there, and I believe it's in the wood. And again, the luthier, the carver. But
I don't know. It could be in the wood. Depending on where they got it from or how old it was, or who knows,
yeah,
if
you
it
don't
was,
know where that wood's been, what's happened on that ground, where that tree was. They talk about witness trees, particularly some of these Civil War battlefields where there's a really old tree there, and they say that tree was here during the battle. That tree saw the battle. And some of the ones at Gettysburg, they've seen the ghosts of some of those soldiers sitting up in the tree. And you have people like the Druids that worshipped the trees in nature. They believe there were spirits in the trees. And there are certain things, naiads, dryads. I always get those mixed up. I think a dryad is the spirit of the wood, and a naiad is the spirit of the water. And I've got a story about an encounter with one of those, according to a Ouija board. If you'd like to hear that story,
Yeah.
let me wet my whistle here a little bit. I'm getting kind of dry. Not much humidity out here in the high desert, but started out. I grew up in Eastern Tennessee, out in the county. Folks had a little mini farm, 26.5 acres. Only about 5 of that was cleared off. So I had a lot of woods and things to play in. And on that property, there was 7 natural springs, 6 that flowed out of a hillside, and 1 was an artesian that came up out of the ground that flowed into a bigger creek, and that went down to the lake, which was a few hundred yards away. Well, this one boundary of our property, there was an old ditch through there. It's about 10, 12 feet deep, and found out later through research that that was the old stagecoach road through there and had been since back to Revolutionary War times. Well, I was up at one end, the far end of the ditch, and my brother used to have hunting dogs, and he'd had some dog pens up there. They were basically rusting into the ground. He hadn't used them in years. He's 17 years older than I am. I was a late in life, unexpected baby. But I kind of walked up there and just looked down in the ditch and didn't see anything interesting, just leaves and dead stuff and, dead tree matter. And I turned around to walk away, and I heard what sounded like something running in the leaves. And I'm 8 years old. I whip back around, and I see something come up over the top lip of that ditch, and it's headed straight for me. I can see the leaves being kicked up. I can see tree limbs being knocked out of the way a lot higher than my head, but there was nothing there. I couldn't see whatever it was. I could see the effect it was having on everything. I could feel the footfalls. It was big, whatever it was, even though I couldn't see it. So I took off back down the hill, running, screaming, crying. Once the paralysis broke, I was probably a quarter mile away from the house. And I was making such a commotion that my mom came out on the back porch to see what I'd done this time. And I ran past her and went in the house and hid under the furniture. And she coaxed me out and got me settled down enough to tell her, there was something big that I couldn't see that chased me out of the woods. It came out of the ditch. And about that time, my dad got home from work, and my brother, who lived elsewhere with his family, he stopped by too. And I was, still white as a sheet and shaking and telling all this. And they went up there and looked. And I wouldn't go with them. I said, nope, I'm not going up there, but go up there by the dog lot. And they came back, and they could see where something had ran in the leaves, and there was broken tree branches and stuff. Mm. So they're like, well, was it a bear? No. Was it a deer? No. Was it this? Was it that? I was raised in the woods and spent a lot of time in the Smokies. I knew what a bear looked like. I knew what a deer looked like. I knew what all kinds of woodland animals looked like. But you could see all those. The thing with this was I couldn't see it. So I didn't go back up there ever by myself that time. I did have a kid that came home from school with me one time, and I'm like, Johnny, go stand up there by the ditch. I'm going to stand down here by this tree. And he's up there, and he's walking around. He's like, and I'm like, okay. And then I think I even walked up close to it and let him hide behind the tree, but nothing. And I just kind of forgot about it, but I avoided that area for years and years. Well, flash forward, I'm 15 years old. We were getting ready to move. We'd sold that. They'd subdivided that property and sold it off in several lots. And we were moving to a subdivision up in Carnes, close to where I went to high school. And I was just out kind of walking around the property and looking at all my childhood haunts, because I knew, time there was limited now. I mean, there was a bee tree up there. There was boulders. I had forts and things in the woods. And it was a great place to grow up as an only child and have lots of adventures. And I walked back up there to the ditch. Same thing. I looked down in there, didn't see nothing. I just kind of chuckled. I wonder what that was that scared me when I was a kid. Turned to walk away. Sure enough, I hear something familiar. It's that sound of something running in the leaves. It comes up out of the ditch. Now, I didn't run screaming and crying that time, but I didn't waste any time getting down off the hill. And we moved from there about 3 months later, and I haven't been back since. Part of me would like to go back just to see if it'd get after me again, because it wouldn't bother anybody else. But now fast forward another few years. I'm 21 or so this time, in college. and I was working part-time at a fast food place in Cedar Bluff area of Knoxville. And the guy invited me to a party after work, and I just knew him from work. I'm not the party sort of person anyway. I've always enjoyed my own company. But I said, yeah, I'll go with you. It was just down the road in an apartment complex, like a clubhouse there. I went, there's a bunch of people there. I didn't know anybody except the guy from work, and I didn't even really know him. And I'm just hanging out like, yeah, okay, I'm going to leave soon. And some girls there had pulled a Ouija board out from under a couch or somewhere, and they were setting that up, and they were going to go around the room and ask people questions. And they were doing it, and it's doing this figure eight thing. I think there was 4 of them working at 3 or 4. And they come around to me, and I thought, I've got a good question for you. And this is all I said. These exact words I said, what scared me when I was a child? With that incident in mind, nobody there knew that story. Outside my family, nobody knew that story. Well, the Ouija board starts doing its thing. It spells out WATERSPRITE. They look at me and I'm like, I don't know. And they said, maybe it's thirsty. Ha, it wants a drink. Get it some water. Get it a Sprite. And then they went on to the next person. But that kind of stuck in my head. And the next time I was off, which I think was the next day, this is pre-internet. I went to the big library in downtown Knoxville, and I went up to the reference desk and I asked the lady, I said, what can you tell me about a water sprite or a water spirit? So she heads off into the stacks. I sit at the table. A few minutes later, she comes back carrying these big books and drops them down. And it's open to this thing about elementals and Fae type stuff. There's a naiad and a dryad. And I think the water sprite, the water spirit, is a naiad and is a guardian of the waters. And what better place for a water spirit to be than on this property where there were 7 natural springs?
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know why it didn't like me around, other than that I'm attuned to things like that. I've had supernatural experiences since early childhood. I mean, like 2, 3 years old. But according to the Ouija board, that's what I encountered. And that's a good explanation as anything I can think of.
Yeah. Now you growing up there in Smokies, your family, were they attuned to all this too? Did you grow up with your family knowing about this stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Now my dad's side of the family, they're from Middle Tennessee, over on the Cumberland Plateau, the Jamestown area. But my mom's family, they're from the Cades Cove area of the Smokies. That was where they landed when they came over from England. And in fact, some of my relatives are buried in that cemetery there at Cades Cove. But my grandmother, she called herself a gypsy witch. I don't know where the gypsy came from, because she was born right there near Cades Cove or Ramsey area. And I'm thinking somewhere back in the lineage, there may be some old country that they were from. But anyway, she called herself a gypsy witch, and she told fortunes. She read tea leaves, coffee grounds, playing cards. She wouldn't touch tarot cards. She didn't like tarot cards. She made what basically amounted to her own Lenormand cards, which is regular playing cards with additional symbols added to them. And she would use those. She also, phrenology, where they can tell things about your personality by the bumps on your head. And if you look, there's some old Victorian ceramic heads that still have all the different areas marked off when people practice that. It's like palmistry, but they use your skull. She practiced that. She made charms and things like that. And she also read animal entrails. Big family. She had 10 kids, my mom, and 9 boys. And according to her sons, she was more accurate than the Old Farmer's Almanac when it came to predicting next year's crops. And those people lived and died by the Old Farmer's Almanac. It hung on a nail in the kitchen. But they raised hogs, among other things. They had hogs, and they had a dairy farm. They had hogs and tobacco and produce. They truck farmed. And every year in the fall, when they'd get ready to butcher hogs, she would pick one out and call that hers. And when they butchered that one and got ready to render it out, she would poke around in it with a stick, and she could tell them, corn ain't going to do no good this year, but tobacco will be all right. It's just things like that. And she was eerily accurate. But they came out of the spiritualism movement from around the turn of the last century. right after World War One was when they got into it, trying to find out what had happened to some of their relatives that never came back. But yeah, when my mom was a little girl, she was born in 1927, but she can remember, in the early 30s, and even when her and my dad married in the 40s, he's observed it. They regularly they held seances, they did table tapping or table tipping, table where they to try to make the table rise. They would do that too. They played with Ouija boards and spirit boards and stuff. And my dad said they the biggest bunch of heathens he'd ever seen. He said they'd be sitting around, all the whole family, and they've got their hands on this table. Rise, table, rise, rise, rise. And it would. And he said that my dad was a scientist. He worked at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So that's one reason I'm so weird. I had the science and the supernatural, and boom, put them together. So he walked around, he observed, he looked under the table. Nobody had their foot under the toe of their foot under any of the table legs. Nobody had any rulers or anything in their sleeves to make it rise. Some of the tricks that you can do.
Isn't that the kind of table that has one leg?
No, this had four. It was just an old kind of farmhouse table. Now they make different ones. There's one-legged tables that they do that with. There's some that are triangular that have three legs, but this was just their dinner table. And he said one time they put one of their grandkids up on the table and were then trying to make it rise. And so that old wooden table was creaking and groaning and just trying as best as it could to get off the ground with the weight of that kid on there, but it couldn't do it. But I mean, just and my grandmother, I was her favorite one out of all the grandkids, dozens of them, because all those 9 brothers, every one of them was married at least once, some of them multiple times. I had one uncle that he liked to brag that he'd been married 7 times to 6 women, and that was the only mistake he'd ever made, was marrying the same one twice. I thought, it sounds to me like you made more than one mistake there, Herb. But out of all those grandchildren, I was born, they call it, down south, it's called a veil over your face, or caul. All that is, it's the amniotic sac. The afterbirth was still stretched over my head. They had to cut it away. And my granny got that and saved it. I don't know what she did with it. It's supposed to be powerful. But my mom was out of it. They'd given her twilight sleep. I was born in 1963, and they were still using that on women. But out of all the grandkids, I was the only one born with a veil over my face. So in her superstitious mind, that marked me as a special child. I was supposed to have second sight and all these abilities and stuff. And I do. I do tune into all that stuff. But because of that, she took me under her wing, so to speak, and would try to teach me things. And I was scared to death of her when I was a kid. She looked like a witch, just out of a Brothers Grimm fairy tale or something. And
poor grandma.
But she lived in this big old Victorian house, farmhouse. I kind of 3 stories. It was 2 stories, and then there were dormer windowed rooms up on the top. But after my grandfather passed away and all the kids moved away, she lived there by herself. And what had once been a big formal dining room, that became her quilting room. And her and one of my aunts would sit in the cooler months and watch the soap operas and cut pieces out for quilts. And then during the wintertime, they would sit in there and piece those quilts together in that big dining room. They had a big quilting frame in there, quilted them by hand. But she would whisk me into that dining room, because otherwise it was off limits to any of the grandchildren. But she would take me in there, and she just had curtains up. She'd draw the curtains over the door, and she'd tell me some superstition or something, how to get rid of good luck or bad luck or dispel the evil eye or what have you. And I'd have to repeat it back to her. But if I could repeat it back to her satisfactorily, she'd give me a Hershey bar or sometimes a crisp new dollar bill. And back when I was, 7, 8, 9 years old, you could get a lot with a dollar bill. That'd get me several 15-cent comic books and an icy from something like that. But I'd tell it back to her and then get out of there. But she had ways of knowing things that she couldn't possibly know. Much later in life, I met a woman that had gone to see my grandmother when she was in high school. Her and a couple of girls decided they were going to go. Everybody called her Mamaw. They were going to go let Mamaw Bessie tell their fortune. And they had to walk a couple miles. This was out in the country. And on the way there, this one particular lady, Anna, she's passed on now. She was telling the other girls, she said, well, I'll go along with you, but I don't believe in it. I think it's a bunch of BS or whatever. and just a bunch of mumbo jumbo, but I'll go to see what she has to say. And so they get there, they knock on the door. My grandmother comes to the door and they said, "Mama Bessie, we're here to get our fortunes told." And she said, "Well, I'll tell yours and I'll tell yours, but I won't tell yours because you don't believe in me and you mocked me."
Wow.
And Anna said, "You could have knocked me over with a feather." Said there was no way she could have heard that because we had to walk a couple of miles to get there. And I'd already shut it up by the time we got there. But my grandmother knew.
Huh.
And the scariest other thing like that happened to me, we were on the way to her house. We lived about 20, 25 miles away. We had to pass by another old farmhouse that sat up on a little hill. Well, sometime prior to me even being born, some kids would play a ball out in the yard, chased the ball down into the road, and got hit by a car and killed right there.
Mm.
And that was a cautionary thing. That's why you don't chase the ball into the road. But anytime we drove by there, I could feel that spot. I mean, it would give me like a little shiver. And I remember one night we were on the way to her house, and I was laying in the back seat reading a comic book. We had a 60-something Chevy too, so no seat belts or anything back then. If they had them, didn't know about them. Nobody cared. I rode in that same car all the way to Michigan once, laying up in the back window. And now they put you under the jail if they saw your kids doing that. But anyway, we're driving along. I'm laying back there reading my comic book, and I felt that little tingle. And I looked up, and sure enough, we were just passing by that farmhouse where that kid had died in the road.
Mm.
Well, we get to her house. My mom and dad are carrying stuff in, and I didn't say a word to them. I just went back to my comic book. She whisked me into the sewing room, and she was talking something about how you feel things and something. And I said, she's like, "You feel things?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Like, I have feelings. You can hurt my feelings, or you can hurt me. Like you can pinch me or whatever." She said, "No, no, no." She said, "I mean, you feel things like that spot on the highway tonight." And I just, in my eyes, I was
Wow.
like 8 years old, and she was in my head. She could read my mind. It scared the
Mhm.
bejesus out of me. But she
Now,
would do stuff like that sometimes.
were these feelings you think was because you're in tune with that kind of thing, or does people that have the same kind of attributes, are they attracted to each other, then so that it kind of like a
They
magnetism pull each
they
other
do they do
towards?
it they do attract certain wavelength. I've got a RH negative blood. People with RH negative blood tend to gravitate toward one another. I've got the green eyes. My hair used to have a reddish tint before it went gray. But there's something to all that. Like Midnight Society and I, the future Miss Stockton there, we're both on that same wavelength. We finish each other's sentences and things. And I've met other people like that, and I think it's an innate ability that all humans had at one time, but it's been programmed out of us. We've lost a lot of that. Everybody has a third eye or a sixth sense or whatever you want to call it. And one of the things that when you start looking, and I'm going to get into some conspiracy theory rabbit holes here, but one of the things you start looking at is the seat of the third eye, supposedly in the head. That's where your supernatural abilities, your ESP, psychic stuff happens. Well, remember when they first started putting fluoride in toothpaste, and that was the thing. You
Yes.
gotta
Yeah.
have fluoride. You gotta have fluoride. You gotta have fluoride.
Mhm.
One of the things that does, it calcifies your pineal gland, which
Right.
that's where they believe that the seat of the third eye is. So I think it's by design. We've had that not only programmed out of us, but medicined and chemicaled out of us. I
Mhm.
think people at one time, because you could think about that years and years ago before telephone or telegraph or anything like that, news was still able to travel some distance. I mean, you had far-flung flyers and things that people delivered, but there were people that would know, like when something was going on. Like even my dad's mother, and she was an herb doctor, but she didn't have any supernatural powers. She was meaner than the devil, but other than that, um, but she knew. Like she sat up one night and she said, "My brother passed away." And I looked at the clock, marked the time. Sure enough, several days later, she got a letter in the mail, and her brother had passed away. It is a different time zone, but it was the same time that she had woke up in the middle of the night and just knew that he was gone. And
Mhm.
I think that's
Yes.
something that we all have, and
Yeah.
we either don't know how to use it or we've lost the ability to use it. Like I said, it's been programmed out of us because that's the first thing they tell you. Oh, that's bunk. That doesn't exist. It's ghosts don't exist, and this doesn't exist, and that don't exist. But I think that's why children have more encounters with the paranormal and the supernatural stuff. They don't know any better yet. They don't know that you're not supposed to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like certain siblings have connections, especially twins. They just have that connection. They could be in another country across the whole state and have that connection, know something's wrong.
Know something's wrong. And I've read cases of twins that were separated at birth, maybe given up for adoption, and then they meet back up later in life. They don't only look similar, but there are cases where they've married women that look similar, that have the same names, and their children have the same names, even though they haven't seen each other in 30 or 40 years. There's something to that. And I went to school with twins, and their mother said that when they were little babies, they had like their own language. They would baby talk to one another, and each one would understand the other. So what kind of ability is that?
Wow.
I mean, you even hear about people that foretell the natural disasters. I mean, there's people out there with cases where they get belly aches when they're around where an earthquake or tremors start. They get that queasy feeling in there, and they start getting mind fog.
I've had that. I've had really bad headache before, almost like a migraine, just prior to an earthquake. Now, it doesn't happen every time, but a major earthquake, I've had headaches before. Maybe, I'll say coincidence, but I don't believe in coincidence. I think there's a synchronicity to everything. But
I think so too.
I don't claim any powers, but that's happened to me before. There's times that I've just known things that I had no way of knowing.
Yeah, same here.
How do you know? I don't know. I just do. Yeah.
Yeah. You just know certain things. And you can't explain how.
I think that's an ability that we all have, and it's been worked out of us for whatever reason, because, if people are going to come against us, and if you believe in the Bible, it talks about how we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against the powers and the principalities and the spirits of the air, wickedness in high places. So it's all spiritual warfare. And I asked my brother about that one time. My brother went on to be a Pentecostal minister. And I asked him one time, I said, what is all this stuff that can't be explained? There's supernatural things. And a lot of people will tell you, religious people say it's a demon. If it's not an angel, it's a demon. Well, he didn't believe that way. He said, there's just some things that we can't explain. He said, I've seen things that I couldn't explain. And the way he explained it, and it was the most succinct explanation I've ever heard from a religious standpoint. He said, everything we consider the supernatural, everything we could measure and quantify and write out how it happens, he said, that was all spoken forth out of the supernatural during creation. He said, in the natural, he said, that's man's laws. That's stuff that we've come up with, a yardstick by which we measure stuff to satisfy us. But the supernatural, that's God's laws, and God can do whatever God wants to do. If he wants to put a kangaroo in a cornfield in Tennessee, which happened, it'll happen. So there you go. And I thought, that blew my mind, but it made sense.
Yeah, growing up, and James brought this up, you have Christians that don't want to deal with the supernatural, but what you're believing in, what you're reading every day in the Bible, there's this supernatural weaving all through the whole Bible.
All through it. But I've been in churches where the age of miracles has passed away. We get out of that church real quick. I think it was Einstein, said that some people never see a miracle, other people see them every day. And that's the way I am. And if you look at numbers, and I think you and I talked about that there, Midwest, how God is in the numbers. If you look at the Fibonacci sequence, you look at the golden ratio, that is all throughout nature. It's in seashells, it's in flowers, it's, even in chaos theory, in the Mandelbrot and the Julia sets, there's an organization in there. And the numbers, that number sequence, you can find that in everything in nature. And I believe God is in the numbers.
I did that the other day at work because we were putting a label on a machine, and the engineer wanted to know, do you have a tape measure? How long is this piece of pipe that we want to put that thing in? And I put my finger up there using the Fibonacci, the golden rule, because all our joints are exactly the same It's like, oh, you want 2 inches? He goes, well, how do you know that? So I explained the golden ratio to him. Never heard of it before.
Yeah, most people haven't. You'd be surprised. You start talking about that, and it's even found like in a lot of your very popular artworks and things like the Mona Lisa and things like that. You can find that spiral in there, the way it's laid out, the proportions and things. It's amazing. And some of those people now, Leonardo, he may have done it intentionally because he was turned on like that, but I think there's people that do it and don't even know they're doing it. It's just the order of things. It's the natural order of things.
Yeah, it's amazing when you start looking at everything in nature, the flowers and how the petals are arranged and how many petals there are. And you look at waves in the ocean, and when they curl over, have that same ratio. Seashells have that same ratio built into them. I mean, it's just amazing where the golden ratio comes in. You just got to stop and look and figure it out.
Yeah, and I don't know why they don't teach that in schools. Now, I had classes in college that briefly touched on it, but I think they ought to teach that in elementary school.
So getting back to the fairies, we kind of got off a little bit.
I'm all over the road. That's just me.
It's all been entertaining. I don't care where we go, but do you think there are different fairies or fays for each part of the country, kind of like there is for Sasquatch and Dogman? Everybody names them different.
I think so. And if you look at Sasquatch and Dogman and all those, things under the umbrella of the Fae, you have them in different areas, and then that's just different Fae in different areas. You've got that's one thing. Like in other countries and things, you have the Yeti and you have the abominable snowman or whatever it is. You have those stories, and you have that type of creature everywhere. Same with the UFO sightings. There's I can't think of any country that doesn't have some kind of aerial phenomena.
Right.
Which that's more programming. It used to be UFOs. Now it's what is it? Unexplained aerial phenomena. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, UAPs.
I call them UFOs.
They switched up the language, and the first person that I ever heard use that term was Hillary Clinton. So there you go. Some kind of programming there.
Yep, they want to control the narrative. They switched up the initials on us.
Yeah.
But I think that there's different types of Fae in different areas of the country and then different parts of the world. Like if you look at some of the stories from Scandinavia and compare those to the stories of little people here, say in the Pacific Northwest or in the New England area with the Pukwudgies, it's the same creatures, but just a little different, just like people. Somebody from that part of the country will look a little bit different than somebody from, say, South America or somebody from different parts of the world. And I think it's the same with the Fae and things like that.
So do you have any legend? Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. When the Native American Indians talked about the legends of the little people coming out of the rocks and they were mean and nasty, were they actually talking about little fairies, or are little people something different than the Tinkerbell type fairy?
It just depends on the story and the tribe. Like the Cherokee, they've got a story for everything. But they talk about they were at war with the little people. They described them as being anywhere from a foot to maybe 3 foot high, but they made a peace with them. They don't battle them anymore. Same with Bigfoot. They had hairy giants that they spoke of. Yolungite to Sunday. I'm not saying the Cherokee right. I don't remember if that's little people or Bigfoot, but they had a story for it. And I think it's all connected. It all goes together. And something else I found interesting, there's a type of a fairy or fae or maybe even an elemental that can disguise itself as a rock. And
so they do shapeshift.
They do shapeshift. Some of them can. Yeah. Okay. Some of them can. They have different powers and different abilities depending on what part of the fae. There's like they have like a queen and different hierarchies and different groups and different. It's when you dig into some of those Celtic legend books, it's amazing how much detail went into it. But there's some kind of creature that can disguise itself as a rock, and when an unwary person happens by, it will open up and swallow them, and then take whatever it needs, their life essence or their soul or whatever it's gained from, and then spit them back out. Well, there's been several missing person cases in or around boulder fields, And there's been people that have been found deceased in those boulder fields that weren't there when it had been searched maybe 2 or 3 times, and yet they look like they'd fallen from a great height when there was no height to fall from. It's an open field. But you think about that. If a rock creature swallowed you and crushed you and then spit you back out, you might look like you had fallen from a height. There's one in, I think that's in the Bennington Triangle too, where a hunter went missing. They finally found him in the woods in a clearing, and it looked like he'd been crushed to death, like every bone in his body type crushed. And there were boulders there. And some people would attribute that, oh, it was a Bigfoot. It grabbed him and put him in a bear hug and squeezed him. But I think it was one of those rock monsters.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah, because there's stories of Sasquatches turning into stumps or blending into a tree. So I was wondering if fairies
I've heard
or any
those
of the
too.
elementals do the same.
I interviewed a girl named Kay Love that she was either from Texas and living in the Bay Area or the other way around. She heard Mount Shasta's call, dropped everything, quit her job, bought camping equipment and outdoor equipment, and went and lived on Mount Shasta in a tent for 5 months because she felt this pull. And she encountered UFOs. She encountered what she called tree people or Sasquatch. And she said sometimes she would see them like just duck behind a tree, and then they don't come out the other side. You can walk up to that tree. They're not there. And she said sometimes they would just peek out. And she said that what they were doing, they were kind of gauging your reaction to see how much they could reveal themselves to you. But BMR wrote some stories for 13 Past Midnight that I narrated. And there's stories in there of a guy that was looking through a spotting scope and looking at this big stump. And I don't remember that stump being out here before. Wonder where it came from. And then all of a sudden it stands up and walks away.
Yep, I've heard stories like that.
They can disguise themselves as they can shapeshift.
Now, do you think all elementals have that ability to be a changeling into nature, anything into nature, or is it only certain?
I kind of like to think that maybe it's only certain ones that all those things, whether they're Fae or some type of the Fae, they seem to have an assignment. Now, where that comes from, the fairy queen or the devil or whoever created those beings, they seem to have some sort of assignment that they're bound to. And there's certain leeway within that. But I think there's some that can change and do whatever they want to. There's stories of people being missing and hearing a loved one's voice coming out of a cave. Maybe somebody that's either already deceased or somebody that's thousands of miles away. Hey, it's me. I'm in here. Come in here. They're mimics. They can mimic voices. And again, that be familiar spirits that the Bible and other books talk about. I don't know, but there's some scary, scary stuff out there when you start delving into all this. And I always like that Nietzsche quote, whenever you peer into the abyss also peers into you. You get too interested in stuff like that, and it'll consume your mind. That's why I've got so many different things that I jump around to. It gets pretty dark sometimes, and you got to back up and go watch funny fail videos or cute cats or something like that to kind of get the cobwebs out of your head.
Oh yeah, you hear of all kinds of people that get so consumed and it's like they become mad. They start losing their mind, or at least maybe they understand what they're talking about, but everybody else around them has no idea.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a weird world out there. And there's another quote that I love. Charles Fort once wrote, "One measures a circle beginning anywhere." And that's true. Anywhere in the paranormal, the supernatural, you can start here, then go all the way around, and you're probably going to come back full circle eventually if you pursue it enough.
I think it's all connected.
It is. And I've been doing this for decades, and I found that I've never found the first answer to anything. I've got more questions than when I started. I gave up looking for the answers. I'm looking for the next set of questions now. And one night I was on with Soraya Azkath on Where the Road Go podcast, and he likened the paranormal to a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle, but you don't have the box, so you can't see what picture you're even trying to put together. And then the more you try to put it together, then you find out some cosmic prankster has put maybe 6 or 7 or 8 puzzles in the same box and mixed it all up. So this piece might not even fit the particular piece the puzzle that you're working on. And that's one of the best analogies I've ever heard. that they're just it's all little pieces, and sometimes you can get a little bit of it together to kind of get a peek at it, but I don't think we'll ever put it all together, put the whole puzzle together, and see the big picture.
It's amazing. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that I think this world's to the point that nobody believes anybody's word anymore.
No, and
You know, years ago, it used to be in court, in testimony, you believe that person's word for it. Now you're trying to tell someone something, they're saying, "Oh, you're crazy." They just throw it out.
oh yeah, and the internet, the anonymity of the internet has emboldened people to be even bigger liars and troublemakers.
Mhm.
It's easy to sit behind a keyboard and cause trouble, but yeah, the way I was taught, your word is your bond. My dad
Yeah.
had all kinds of business deals and something. A simple handshake, that was enough.
Mhm.
And nowadays, I mean, you get
Yep. Not these days.
don't tell them what had happened to you. I've been in some situations like that myself. People make promises and take vows, and it doesn't mean anything. It's just empty words.
Right.
And the way I look at that, if I tell you that, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. You know, you can't. I've failed at things before, but if I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. I'm not telling you just to get you to go away, even though I felt like doing that before to people.
Right.
Yeah, I'll whatever you want. Just leave me alone.
That's why I think a lot of people aren't telling their stories. They're afraid to say anything to anyone.
Yeah, and there's kind of a paradigm shift in that. I do like the listener stories and things like that, where people send in their encounters, and when I read those, other people will comment, Steve, I've had a similar experience, but I've never told anybody because I was afraid they'd think I was a drunk or a drug addict or crazy.
Mhm.
You know, this is taking a burden off me. I've lived with this for years. Now I can come forward and tell my story, and I love that. And that's what Strange Things in the Woods is. It's stories that I collected from friends and family and friends and family and things, with a common theme of whatever it was that had to be in the woods. But some of those stories, I think just about everybody in there that I got stories from is deceased now.
Wow.
Especially some of the older people. And you know, their stories live on. I love that I'm able to put it out there for posterity. But there was like one old gentleman that's got several stories in there. He was reticent to talk about it. He was reluctant. And then once he saw I wasn't going to make fun of him or call him crazy or whatever, that I had a genuine interest in. He had a lot of paranormal experiences. And he was telling me stuff, and this guy was in his 80s. I was probably late teens at the time. And his wife, whom he had been married since time immemorial, probably 50, 60 years anyway, she's sitting there with him, and she'd look back and say, "You never told me that." So he was, once I said, first it was like dragging it out there with a log chain, but once I broke the dam, then all these stories come spilling out. And there was a time this happened, and I saw this, and one time my brothers and I did that. And there's old folks are such a wealth of information and stuff. That's I travel and do appearances and things, and one of my favorite things to do when I go into a new town that I've never been to before, I will find, like, if there's a retirement home or a place where the old people, I'll go and speak. I'll go and read from my books and tell stories. A lot of people, they'll just show up to have something to do, or, oh, there's no bingo tonight, so I'll go listen to this guy. Or maybe they're sitting back there knitting or crocheting or something. But then you get the people that it really turns on. And I know those times you can see it in their face. And then after I'm done with my talk, there'll be people wait. They'll line up. Let me tell you what happened to me 70 years ago. And I love that kind of stuff. And it's just, I had that epiphany at my grandmother's funeral. She passed away when I was 13. And I was standing there looking at her in her coffin. And I thought, all those legends, all those superstitions, all those stories, they go right there into the ground with her. And I thought, I'm not going to let that happen, because none of the other cousins, even her kids, didn't care anything about all that stuff after they got out of the spiritualism side of it. The seventh son ended up becoming a Baptist preacher, and he converted them all to religion, and they gave up their heathen ways. But they didn't care about those old stories. And I thought, I'm just going to take that mantle upon myself. I'm going to preserve these stories and pass them on. So that's where this comes from. I'm working on a book just about my grandma, and that one I'm taking my time, because I want to do it right. Because other than my parents and one particular elementary school teacher, my grandmother was the biggest influence on my life, but especially in areas of the paranormal and supernatural and things like that. So
That-
I want it to be a fitting tribute to her. So I'm taking my time on that one.
That's
Awesome.
amazing. That's awesome that you're doing that.
Wow.
You know, I was going to say earlier that the one thing that this, when they made us be unsocial for this time, you know, everybody had to stay home, that everybody started being social online. You know, everybody started all these podcasts and we got all these connections with everybody and people coming on that you never heard of before telling their stories, you know.
Yeah, and I love it.
Right.
And we're seeing another renaissance like in the UFOs and things like that. There was a big flap back in 73. I was 10 years old. I remember that well. The skies were full of them. My brother and his family lived up on a hill, the highest hill in that area. And my parents and I would go up there in the evenings some nights and sit in lawn chairs and watch all this stuff going on in the sky. And it's kind of coming to that point again. You know, they've been all these lights and the UAPs or whatever they call them now, had the stuff with the weather balloons. I had a garden shed out here that blew away. It's a tubular aluminum frame with a tarpaulin-like material stretched over it. It looks like a little house. Well, it had gotten blown away before we had some high wind storms out here. And Sandy and her husband lived here before me. I bought the house from them. But when they lived here once, it ended up down at the ball stadium, which is 0.6 of a mile away. But I came out one Friday morning. We'd had some high winds, and my garden shed's gone. There wasn't anything in it. There's no floor or anything to it, but it was just gone. I looked over the fences into the neighbors' yards. I looked in the street, went around a few blocks. I even went down to the ball stadium to see if it ended up down there again. Nowhere to be found. I thought, well, it's probably in the Animas River, which is just right on down the hill. But Friday to the day, a week later, it showed back up in my backyard, almost exactly where it left from, but the back end of it was caught in a tree. And I'm out there trying to get it out of the tree, and there's I think it's the granddaughter of the people that live right behind me, little girl with a pumpkin-shaped head, sticks her head over the fence, and she's laughing. And I said, "Was this in your yard over there?" And she said, "No, mister." She said, "It fell out of the sky." And I said, "Are you serious?" And she had some other little kids there playing with her, and they're like, "Yeah, we saw it." Said it was way up there. We watched it come down.
Oh, wow.
And Sandy's husband even joked that maybe it took it up into the atmosphere, and the Air Force shot it down thinking it was one of those Chinese weather balloons. And I said I was going to spray paint not a Chinese spy balloon on the side of it in case it takes off again. Or I've got some extra GoPros. I thought about putting a GoPro on it. But when it came back, it had a hole in the roof of it. Almost half the roof was torn out. It looked like it was just blown out of it. So who knows? But for that to go up and to land almost exactly in its own footprint, what are the odds? And according to those little kids, they watched it fall out of the sky. So
that was days later, too.
A week later, a week to the day.
Wow.
That makes me think of the Wizard of Oz. Maybe
That's
there was a witch
exactly,
under it.
yeah. That's exactly what I thought.
Oh, wow.
But stuff like that just happens to me on a routine basis. I mean, I've come to expect the unexpected. I'm not surprised or shocked by anything really anymore.
I'm not either. Nothing surprises me these days.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
So that's
you
what
just
we're
have to
doing
laugh.
today.
But it
wow.
makes life interesting, that's for sure. There's a
Yep.
old Chinese saying, "May you live in interesting times," and that's a blessing and a curse. So there you go.
Well, we were talking about everything being interconnected and all this stuff. You know, it's amazing that when I first started reading about this or listening to Art Bell or whatever, you know, there was like Sasquatch stories and people were just in tune with Sasquatch, or you might have somebody in tune with paranormal. Now these days, with all these shows coming out, you're having people starting to open their eyes and starting to look around and say, "Hey, I
It's
believe
everywhere.
in Sasquatch. I can believe in ghosts too."
Right.
Mhm.
And then now, just if we can get them to believe in the Fae, then it'll
Right.
all be under that one umbrella and a nice little box with a bow on top of it.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's a renaissance in that too. That's still ongoing. But I was part of a ghost hunting group, and that's not what we called ourselves, in the mid 80s. There wasn't any such thing. And now you go on Facebook and look, everybody and their brother has got a ghost hunting group. Some of them are pretty good.
Yeah.
Other, I think it's just people, like live action role playing Scooby Doo or something. Let's go to the graveyard, gang, and see what we can see. But there's people getting some real evidence and some real. Michael Laciata, a friend of mine on Facebook, he goes out and does EVP recordings, and that man has got some of the clearest EVPs I've ever heard. But I don't think it's the equipment that he uses. It's him. He could take a Fisher Price cassette recorder out there, and I think they would get it's because of him. He's the vessel that's coming through. But I believe that's what a lot of people miss, that not everybody has that ability, and people have different abilities. Some people see things, some people hear things, some people are able to communicate with stuff easier. Some people
We're
are meant
on
to sit
different
and
levels.
listen. Yeah. We're all part of the same energy, but there's different wavelengths. If you look at the light spectrum, there's different. And it's the same with the energy spectrum. There's so much, even in the light spectrum, we can see about this much, and it's this much. That's, I think some of these beings that, whether you want to call it cloaking or whatever, I think they're either a lower or a higher vibrational being than we are, and they can somehow adjust that vibration to make themselves invisible or partially see through, like this Glimmer Man or Shimmer Man or the predator creature. I've had an encounter with one of those in downtown Portland real late at night. I could see through it. It looked like a short-statured person, but like they were made out of saran wrap or something. And it hunkered down behind a garbage can, a permanent garbage can, and a power pole. And I got out of there. I was waiting on the train real late at night. I've been to Powell's City of Books, the biggest independent bookstore in the world. They've got over 1 million books on the shelves, and they have a lot of author events and stuff. And I've been up there to hear some author talk, and was waiting on the train to take me back to my neighborhood. They have a really good commuter train system there. And I saw whatever this was. And at first I saw it kind of shimmering, and I thought it was like steam or something coming out of a vent or a drain. And I was just going to walk over there and take a look. Well, there wasn't any drain. And whatever it was, I could see through it, and it just kind of squatted down. It wasn't very tall anyway. And every hair on my body stood up, but I didn't panic. I just kind of, okay. I didn't want to let it know that I saw it, so I'm just walking around looking. I looked in some windows and stuff. Everything's closed. It was down on the transit mall downtown. And I walked up to the edge of the street there, just like I'm looking up the street for the train. And about that time, the light changed, and there was traffic waiting there. And I ran out into traffic. I'm running between cars. People are starting to go and honking their horns and stuff. And I just kept running, ran through traffic. Thankfully, it's a one-way street that I crossed. And traffic was only going one way. Ran on up the sidewalk, probably 5 or 6 blocks to the next train stop, and there was some people there because I was the only one at that one, and it was like 11 o'clock at night or something, and that was the last train. There was a later bus that ran, but that was the last orange line out of downtown Portland. But I don't know what was that. Was there now? There's a really good book called Cameleo, and I can't think of the author's name right now, but he's, according to him, it's a type of military technology. And part of the people that they use it on is dwarves or little people or midgets or whatever the nomenclature is now. I don't mean to offend anybody. I don't know what they're called. But I think little people is the preferred term now. But they use it on them just because they're so small, because it uses less of the energy to cloak them. And they're also easy to sneak into places and things. But that's a fascinating book, and it's supposedly a true story.
Yeah, I believe in the energy and frequency vibration, that everyone's on different levels. The more you wake up, the more you're experiencing things. And the other night, Garrow and I were talking. Well, it just dawned on me that, we were talking about missing 411, and, a little child goes around the corner, and then you go up there and they're just instantly gone.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, if a dog man or a Sasquatch, they have the cloaking capability. If they grab that child and pull into that cloak, would that child be instantly cloaked and you could hear them scream, cry, or anything?
Think so.
Could that be a possibility?
I think that's a possibility.
Yeah.
And there's been other encounters with those type creatures. Jan Maccabee, Bruce Maccabee's wife, he's a UFO researcher. She was deer hunting in a tree stand, and she saw something in the tree, the next tree over, that looked like a human form, a humanoid form, or an inhumanoid if you read Martin Nunley's books.
Mm-hmm.
But she could see through it. And she took a picture of it with an old flip phone. But at the same time she was having that encounter, on the other side of the woods from where she was, there was a high school football field, and the marching band was out there practicing, and they had a daylight UFO encounter at the exact same time that she's encountering this thing in a tree.
Wow.
I think there's connection there.
Mm-hmm.
The places where you have a lot of Bigfoot sightings, you also have a lot of UFOs. So Mount Shasta, for example,
And
I've spent some time up there, and from what people tell me, that place is like an intergalactic airport for UFOs. Yeah. And then they have all these Sasquatch sightings and stuff too, and New Agers and Ascended Masters and Robot Grandma story and all that, comes from Mount Shasta. Two of the most amazing Bigfoot encounters I've ever heard were from Mount Shasta.
Mm-hmm.
Lady was there in the springtime and saw what she described as a female Sasquatch giving birth on a slope there on the lower part of the mountain. And in the same area, that same field, like almost a year later, another lady, they didn't know each other. The stories only came together after they told them. She saw what she described as a female Sasquatch nursing a baby Sasquatch. So one woman saw it giving birth. A few months later, another woman saw it nursing. I mean, you can't make that kind of stuff up and have it connect with people that didn't plan it out beforehand.
Right.
Oh, yeah, it's all going to be interconnected. I mean, just like you said, there's so many sightings that, you see one phenomenon, then pretty soon there's another one going on, or supernatural stuff happening right in the same area. Sometimes it almost makes me wonder if sometimes the UFOs are dropping things off.
Yeah, I've wondered about that too.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense when you find the child several days later with no shoes on, but their socks on. Their socks are not even dirty.
Yeah, it's like that Riker Webb case.
Into them, and that's why you can't see them or anything, because they're also cloaked with the creature or whatever that grabbed them.
Yeah, like that Riker Webb case that I was talking about, the little boy that looked shell-shocked after he came out of the woods. He was wearing little footy pajamas. And if you look at his picture on the gurney where they found him a couple miles away, it was inclement weather. He had been through the mud, through the woods and the mountains. And the holes are worn in the toes, and they're a little dirty, but there's no way he walked 2 miles through the mountains in the mud and stuff and didn't get dirty.
Mm-hmm.
So did something or somebody pick him up and then just decide, I better not do this, and then drop him off in this garden shed 2 miles away? Or did he just teleport there? They said he liked bugs. He was 3 years old. And when they were tracking him through the woods, they said they found places where rocks had been turned over, like maybe he was looking for bugs. But then he ended up in the garden shed of a cabin a couple miles away, is either sitting in or on a lawnmower bag to catch the clippings. And they heard him talking to himself in there, or talking to something. And that was how they found him.
Wow.
Yeah.
But they asked him what happened. He said, I went for a walk with a dog and I got lost.
A dog. Mm-hmm.
And that's something else that's common in a lot of these cases, especially children cases. They'll go missing with their dog. And sometimes the dog didn't come back, but sometimes the dog will come back. And no idea, if the dog could talk, maybe they could tell you where it went and what happened. But frightening stuff.
Yeah.
Now, and I know a lot of our dogs are genetically made for breeding and stuff, but do you think there's a connection between our pets and dogmen somehow?
I've heard that theory that the dogman was some kind of government experiment gone awry, where they were trying to make a canine super soldier.
Right.
Like imagine a canine human hybrid that could fight in battle, that had teeth but could run and fire a weapon and things too, kind of like a werewolf. But and then it got out, or some of them got out and they bred in captivity or bred with wolves, or maybe really brave people. I don't know, but I've often wondered about that too. You watch these Bigfoot shows and they'll be out there. The guy said, now this is the Bigfoot mating call, and he does this thing what if it worked? I mean, what would you do if you had an amorous Bigfoot come charging out of the woods? Would you stay and take one for the team, or would you run? I think I'd get out of there.
Well, when I was talking about the dogs, you said that a lot of people are missing with their dogs. I was wondering if their pets had a connection with the dog men or whatever, if like they could like communicate since they were both kind of a dog species.
I think that's a possibility. That there's been kids that were following the dog. We didn't know where the dog was going. We followed the dog, and then this happened.
Mhm.
And usually, anything truly paranormal or supernatural that I've encountered, the dogs are afraid of it. There was a Bigfoot encounter that I talk about here around in East Tennessee, where I'm from, where they were standing at the riverbank, and this creature came up over a riverbank. They were out, whether it's possum or coon hunting, something, whatever you hunt at night. I'm not a hunter, so I don't know. But it scared the dogs so bad they turned tail and ran back to the truck. And these are dogs that didn't think anything of to get a hold of a possum or a raccoon. I mean, these are dogs that had chunks of their ears missing and bites in their muzzles from dealing with. I mean, possums are vicious, but whatever this was, it scared the dogs. They didn't want anything to do with it.
Wow.
Amazing. I mean, stuff like that, you just don't know how to explain stuff. You know,
there is no rational explanation, and that's just it. There's not going to be one. There's rationale goes out the window.
Well, to go down a different rabbit hole, I know there's inner earth and hollow earth. They're different, but do you actually believe in inner earth? I mean, the hollow earth, that the elementals and the fairies, they used to be on the surface, but then eventually thousands of years ago, they went to on the hollow earth part.
Yeah, I've heard that theory, and I don't discount anything at this point. I've seen so much and experienced so much and read so much that I don't know.
Right.
I could see it happening, and I know that they're supposedly they won't fly over certain areas. And if you look at Google Maps, there's stuff covered up at the top of the earth, and but then you've got your flat earthers, and that I would like to see the planet from space just to see. But if you look at some of the NASA footage, that one where they're looking at the Earth through the window, they left the camera on a little too long, and you can see them taking the transparency off the window. That wasn't these were the. And they said, well, that was just, we could see the Earth, but the cameras couldn't. So we put that up there just so the folks at home could see it. But who knows?
And then inner earth is something different. It's like the crust is like honeycombs, and there's just caverns and tunnels all over the place. And who knows what's living on the inner earth. But hollow earth is just fascinating. It's like Lord of the Rings. They actually said those movies were based on them traveling to the hollow earth.
Things that I've looked at about the hollow earth. I used to have a book when I was a kid, and it showed the earth is kind of like a donut, and you go inside the donut hole. There's another sun in there, and the the lands and things in there. And then you have stories like that where people claim to have come from lands that you can't find on a map or that don't exist. Video recently, I covered the children of Woolpit. They just showed up in a pit in the UK years and years and years ago. They were green. Their skin was colored green. And they said they came from a place called St. Martin's Land, where it's either the sun never shone or the sun never set. I think the sun never shone. And but they would only eat green beans or fava beans. And they baptized him, and the little boy died right away. And then the little girl eventually lost her green color, but she had no idea of where she actually came from or where she was prior to just showing up in this pit. But they claimed when they first found them that they had gotten lost, that it was storming or something, and they went into a cave, and the cave just kept going, and they walked and walked and walked, and then they came out in this pit. So that's a fascinating story. There's a monument there in the Woolpit that's erected in their honor. It's got little shapes and stuff, and it's got two little green kids on it.
That almost reminds me of like Shangri-La or Shangri-La.
I was just going to say that. That reminds me of that Shangri-La. Yeah.
Very similar encounters, and then that's something you have on basically every continent and every socioeconomic strategy there. People have those stories. I've got a friend in South Africa, and she's told me some of the legends that they have there. Covered a case once where a little boy was apparently abducted, like a daylight abduction. He was just there 1 minute and gone the next. And he described being in a place like that where the sun never completely set, and there was animals that he didn't recognize.
Yeah.
And he was there. It seemed like to him just a few hours, but when he came back, he'd been missing for a couple of weeks. Showed up just almost exactly in the same spot that he disappeared from, wearing the same clothes in front of witnesses.
That sounds
So,
like Mount Shasta stories also.
yeah,
People have said that
yeah,
they've gone to a certain tunnel and they suddenly have gone into hollow earth and they came back out.
yeah. There's supposedly a place, if you go far enough into Shasta, you come out and there's the sky, and there's all kinds of things living in there. There's also rumored to be a city of gold in there, the tunnels that are lined with gold. And there was a lady, I can't remember her name. I've got it in one of my Shasta videos, that she claimed to have been reincarnation of Cleopatra, I think, and she created a religion based on the cities inside Mount Shasta. But she was a Hollywood person and had a flair for the theatrical, so who knows?
Now it makes me wonder if, if that's actually physically really there, or when you go through the tunnel, you actually enter through a gateway that takes you to a different dimension.
That's what I think. It's a rift in time and space, a different dimension, a portal.
Yeah, portal.
Whatever you have, because there are cases like that too, where somebody's hiking along the trail and suddenly they're not on the trail anymore. They look around, there's no trail that they've been on. They don't know where they are, how they got there. And then sometimes they come back, and sometimes apparently they don't. I think that happens. And what if you got over there and you liked it? I've had people say to me, Steve, if you saw a portal, would you step through it? I'd be tempted. If I had my fiance with me and my dog, let's go. Grab my hand. Let's see what's in here. Now, it might be, the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, or it might be like that old 70s TV show, Land of the Lost, where we might have to fight dinosaurs and slee stacks. But I think it would be worth seeing what was over there. Because, what if you couldn't come back? What if you didn't want to come back? That might not be so bad, the way things are now.
Yeah, because even in the 411 missing cases, you have groups of people that are together and somebody turns their back and pretty soon their partner's gone.
Yeah.
And a few of them have came back and said, have talked about, Nordic looking people talking to them and getting them to come in or go through the portal or wherever it is.
Yeah. And you have that with a lot of UFO cases too. And that's another thing to aliens, or whatever you want to call them, those entities. There's a different hierarchy of those. There's the Nordic, there's the Greys, there's the reptilians. Again, I think it's just all different types of the Fae umbrella.
Right.
Yeah, that's just my theory.
Now, is there orbs associated with Fae?
I think so. I think that some of those orbs, again, they some of them that are shapeshifters or whatever you want to call it. That's just a type of energy. The fairy lights, that they're lanterns that they see in the Smokies. That some people have led them out to safety. There's been other people that led them into more dangerous. I think I had a friend that was in there close to the Smokies, in an area that he was hunting. He wasn't supposed to be in there anyway, but it was at night, and he thought he saw somebody ahead of him with a lantern, and he was lost. His lantern had give out. And he said, well, I'll follow that guy and see where he goes. He's probably in here poaching too. And he watched it go across a little place, and he was just following right along. Well, all of a sudden, he fell off about, I think it's a 12 or 15-foot little bluff there, messed his legs up good. Had to go back the next day and look for his shotgun, and found that the barrel's end was stuck in the ground. But he said, I watched that light go right through there, and I thought it was just, part of the forest, part of the woods, but I walked right off a little cliff. So they didn't appreciate him in there poaching, apparently.
Right.
They are pretty protective. I mean, we talked about that in the Faes and the fairy rings.
Yeah.
Well, Jane, do you have any more questions? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground tonight. I don't know if Steve, if you want to stay on longer, or we can cut this off right now. We can do a part 2 some other night.
Let's do a part 2, and I come back and do another hour and a half or so. I had a stream earlier and a video premiere, and my dog needs to go out, and I haven't had dinner yet. So
all right.
Well, same here. We need dinner.
Hate to cut and run, but Well, yeah, we'll do part two. I enjoy this. I can talk for hours in case you can't tell. That's
I
Well,
felt
that's why
bad
you're
having you talk
here.
the whole
one
time
of
and
my
kept having to take drinks. I should have
one of
took a lot
Yeah.
more of the pressure off of you.
one of my superpowers is the ability to talk for hours. Just ask Midnight Society.
Yep.
we
You
we
get
talk
Steve
for
on,
hours all day, every day.
get Steve on and start talking, and you just go.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
just wind me up and let me go. And that's I get invited to a lot of shows like that, and people really appreciate that. We're like, we didn't even have to ask any questions. You just took off. Like we had to, hey,
Yeah.
wait, come back. But I love it. And thanks for you guys for having me on. Hopefully, I helped you get some subscribers here.
That was wonderful.
Folks, if you're here because of me, be sure to like, share, subscribe. These are good folks, good friends of mine, and I support what they're doing here. And yeah, I'd love to come back sometime.
Oh, we'd love to have
I
you
would love
back.
to. Mhm.
All right. Well, thanks again.
All right.
Good.
Well,
Thanks,
thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
My
Thanks,
pleasure.
Steve. All right.
All right. Well, this has been a great show. Thanks everybody for showing up. We had a lot in chat. Sorry again, chat. I couldn't keep up with everybody, and I was trying to pay attention to be able to ask Steve questions, and I just lost track of time.
Yeah, I hope there wasn't questions. Yeah, I'm very sorry for not paying attention to chat. When Steve starts talking, it's just like you're on the edge of your seat, just listening to his stories. So thank you everyone for joining the chat. And
We're going to have to add some mods.
yeah, I'm the only mod in here. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for showing up. Thank you, Steve. Your stories are amazing. I can't wait to have him back on.
Well, everybody, we're going to call it that. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and get this out there. And we're going to have more guests on. We're in touch with some other people, and we're going to have obviously Steve back on. And we just got things going on. We're going to get back out in our backyard some more and start showing some, hopefully, live videos of the night sky. And hopefully we'll catch some stuff moving up there. Otherwise, we'll be doing the same thing we have been, is editing our own videos and showing you what we think is something going on there that we can't explain. And let us know in your messages and chats, and get a hold of us at midwestnightwatchers@gmail.com and let us know of any ideas you'd like us to talk about, or any comments on the show we had tonight, or even previous ones. If you go and look at them, we have 4 or 5 of them up there right now, I believe.
I think this is our 5th one, counting the after midnight. I think I just saw something fly behind your head again.
No, not again. Really?
We're going to have to look, but yeah, it wasn't in front of you. It looked like the same, similar, but I just saw it go behind your head.
Well, if anybody was on William's podcast this morning, I was on there, and we're on William's platform, so we're broadcasting on our channels and his at the same time, William Nighthawk. And almost at the end of the show, right here at this Himalayan salt lamp, there was a mist or a figure coming out of it, waving around, and a couple of times it looked like it almost tapped me on the shoulder. And we kind of think we debugged it by it being a hair or something on my camera lens, but I'm not really positive. I mean, it went away about the same time we were starting to investigate it. And so you can go check out William's show, and it's on our channel too, because we broadcast it live at the same time. And I don't know if Jane just saw something else again. I don't know what's going on.
I mean, this thing this morning, I understand that it could have been like a little spider web in front of that camera on your tablet, but there was times it looked like it was actually behind you and moving up and down and touching you on the shoulder. I don't know. That was very interesting this morning.
Well, when I checked the camera lens, I didn't see anything come off of it or see anything there when I looked at it to clean it.
And it disappeared after you did that, so we don't know. Interesting. Well, once again, thank you everyone for showing up, or all of you who are watching the show afterwards. We greatly appreciate it. And I'm glad you enjoyed our guests. And we didn't plan to have our first three guests, all three of them being authors. I mean, that's not planned, but it's like, okay, this is our third guest, and he's an author too and wrote books. So
Yeah, they've all been amazing, you know,
yeah,
Dennis Carroll and D.A. Roberts, and now Steve
now Steve
Steve
talking.
Stockton, and it's just been amazing guests, and the ones that are coming up are just as amazing that we got lined up coming. This has
Exactly.
just been amazing for us, as well as I hope everybody else is enjoying it. And tomorrow night, I'm going to be on Texas Front Porch, and we're going to talk about our backyard UFO study and portals, and we're going to go into. I'm going to tell a few stories of time lapses and time travel, and we'll go from there. And Jane, you got something coming up?
Yes, Tuesday. I'm pretty sure it's 7 o'clock my time. I'll be on the Nana Boss Conturium with Marty. And we're going to talk about frequencies and healing of the singing bowls. So I'm looking forward to that also. That's actually my very first interview, being on someone else's show. So that's going to be interesting for me, and a nice experience.
Yep,
So
you guys be sure to go out and check out Nana Bosses and everybody on Texas Front Porch platform. We got Blondes and Booze. They've been in our chat tonight. You know, we got Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. We got Jason Questions Everything.
we got Jessica, the Cryptid Huntress.
Jessica's been in our chats many times, and she's a great channel to go watch and check them out. And there's just so many people we've met doing this. We've started out in all their chats, and they've all been so friendly and inviting.
And we all support each other. That's what's amazing. You know, we're all in everyone's chat and sharing out and just supporting each other.
Well, with that, we're going to say goodnight, and we hope you all have a blessed week, and we hope to see you on all these other platforms, and stay tuned for us, because we'll be having, like I said, more guests coming on, and we're going to try to keep up the Sunday nights, I believe, and we might even add another night sometime, and because we got the night owl, we just haven't determined when and where or what time yet, but it's going to be late at night, kind of like what Blondes and Booze did last night. They did a midnight show, and it was really awesome.
That was
check
awesome
that out on
last
their
night.
channel.
Yeah, there's more people that are awake in the middle of the night than you think. That was a big chat last night, and it lasted till like, what, 2 in the morning?
Yeah,
that was great. Well, I enjoyed our night owl. You know, we've only done one so far, and you come home from work at midnight and give you a little time, and we'll just pop on live and see who's still awake.
Yep, we'll just have to continue doing that.
Well,
once again, everybody, it was nice seeing you. You guys in the chat were just awesome tonight, and we will check you later. Good night.
Thank you. Love you all.